Hi, I'd like to introduce you to the HM-5940 Erosion Function Apparatus, or EFA for short. This system is capable of running tests with water velocities between 7.0 meters per second and 0.2 meters per second, as well as being able to do either incremental increases in the sample height or a continuous advance. The way the EFA runs its tests is a Shelby tube that encases the sample is actually placed in this vertical column here. The tube actually penetrates into the water flume to allow the water to erode the sample at a given rate depending on what your test parameters are set at. The Shelby tube is locked in place using this collet, and this handle here, which you can use to tighten on there to hold the tube in place while the sample is actually being pushed through the tube into the water flume. This allows you to raise and lower or adjust the height of the overall motor assembly to accommodate different size Shelby tubes. Once you've established where you want it and you've got the tube and sample in place, you can lock it in place with these 4 collars. We have actually 2 of the collars in the back are set at the factory in order to prevent overdropping the motor to prevent damage to the cables at the bottom of the motor. We recommend that these always remain in place and are never adjusted. These, however, can be adjusted to accommodate the length of the tube as mentioned before. So this is the primary screen that's going to come up once the EFA has actually been turned on. As you can see, we've got your temperature as well as your water speed here at this setting. And you also have your motor controls under this tab, which is going to be either up, down, or stop. You can also set your motor setting to 0 by pressing this button. The second tab we have on here is the pump control, which controls the 3 primary pumps that we have on here. Fill is used to fill up the tank when you're actually using the system and you're trying to get the water level up to its appropriate level. Sump is used for draining and cooling. And flow. Flow being the primary pump that's actually going to run the water through the system under normal circumstances. This little yellow box down here is the flow speed, where you can have it set to measure in either SI or English units, and you can manually adjust this as necessary simply by pressing on the yellow box, entering in the water speed that you wish to use, and hitting the check mark. So one of the features that the EFA currently has is the ability to use the sump pump for extremely low speed water velocity down to 0.2 meters per second. In order to do so, there are several valves that have to be adjusted or closed. In this case, we have the sump pump exit valve, we have the sump pump transfer valve, and we have the primary pump close-off valve. You're going to have to turn off the sump pump exit valve. You're going to have to fully open the sump pump transfer valve, and you're going to have to fully close the primary pump shut-off valve. Now, to get from here to any of your other controls, you hit the home button up here in the top left corner. And you have current tests, previous tests, and setup. We're going to work our way up from the bottom, so we'll hit setup first. Setup's going to bring up a series of icons on the next screen where you can manage your time and date, you can manage your display settings, preferences, network, as well as show you background information as far as the firmware version that you actually have on the machine, contact information, and then there's a final icon for updating the firmware within the system. The key piece that we want to cover is actually under preferences. So preferences is what manages your test. This is what sets all the parameters for your test. And it also has some ancillary data in there like your logger ID, which under most cases you're not really worried about because this is typically run as a standalone system and not connected up to a network. But you also have your motor speed. Now your motor speed is going to manage the rate with which the sample is actually extruded into the water flume in order to actually get your erosion to occur and be able to measure that. And with this, the way it's set up with your push speed and your run speed, push speed is the amount of distance that the speed that it's actually going to raise up each time you push the up button if you have it set to incremental increases. Or you have run speed where it's going to run at a continuous rate and the motor or the specimen motor is slowly going to raise the sample into the water flume in order to manage erosion that way. You've got your power ratings for 10 and 15 horsepower. Typically it's set at 15 horsepower. This isn't something that you should ever have to really worry about. Orientation, again, this is something you don't have to worry about. This is dealing with different variants that we've built that show which way we've got the motor, whether the motor is oriented so that it's above the actual mount bracket that holds the sample, or whether it's mounted below. We currently build it so that it's set below. So like I said, this is something that you're really never going to have to mess with. This is more Humboldt's function than anything else. Your limit switch, this is set on the sample mount so that if your sample, if you reach a maximum extension with the sample, this limit switch will prevent you from extending it any further and damaging either the motor or the mount or the flume, because the motor is actually stronger than the material that's actually used to hold the sample. So I would recommend that you leave this as enabled. Pump control. You have automatic and manual. I'll go over this in a little bit of detail in a little bit, but you have two options when you're actually running the primary pump. You can either run it in automatic, where the pump will use feedback from the flow meter on the water flume in order to determine the actual speed. If you run it in manual, it will use our PID in order to run at a very set speed, and you have to manually adjust the speed using a manual valve that we will cover here in a little bit. For testing, if we slide down further, with test, this is again more parameters. You can have your temperature set either in Fahrenheit or centigrade. We currently have it in Fahrenheit. You can have your flow rate. All of these can either run in English or in SI. So like if we hit flow rate, you've got meters per second, centimeters per second, inches per second, and feet per second, respectively. Typically, everybody does it in meters per second. Same with the sample push, inches, centimeters, and millimeters. Normally, everybody runs this in millimeter. So your interval this is how often it's actually going to take a logging interval as the test is running. How when's it going to actually record a piece of data for your test? And this is fully adjustable and it's set in seconds by default. The final piece on this screen is your storage. And this is, once a test is complete, it gets dumped into storage for later use or recall if you need it. It defaults to 10 units actually being set into the cache that you can recall easily. You can up that to 50. If you go into the recycle button here, it's going to show all the tests exceeding whatever number you have. So like in this case, we have 10 test units. Say you've run 50 tests in the past, 40 of those tests you can actually find by selecting this. And so these are all the functions that you're actually going to see under System Preferences. Information. It's nothing more than this is what this machine currently has for its program. It's got your firmware version. Also, it'll tell you what your network information is as it's set up. And if there ever is an issue, this data can actually be exported and sent back to Humboldt for evaluation if there's a problem with connectivity or any given problem inside the system. This is usually the first place. This is the first thing we're going to ask about if you do ever run into an issue. And finally, update. Well, so update is always done from a USB port or a USB drive that gets inserted here, and it's going to give us an error message. because I don't have one in there. But if I had one in there, what's going to happen is it will automatically scan the USB drive for an update file to actually add in here, and then it will bring up another window with which you can select if you've got multiple updates on there, if you have different types of Humboldt machines on there. Bring that back. Okay, so that takes care of system preferences, or system settings. And the next one is previous tests. As you can see on the left-hand side is a list of the last 10 previous tests, because earlier on you saw where it was set to store 10 tests before sending them into the secondary cache or recycle. So we've got several features on here. In this case, we've got a graph that's showing the temperature versus points recorded. You can toggle this to a different graph by hitting right over here on this label. And it toggles you can either see water speed or you can see the temperature with the graph. Now, if you wish to see the data points of information that was recorded, just simply press this top right-hand button here. And it's a toggle, so it'll toggle between whatever graph you have displayed beforehand along with all the data points. See, if I hit it again, it'll go back to the graph. Now, if you wish to export this information, you'll need a USB stick. Just insert it in here. Let's say we want to export test 2 for use on your PC, or to be reviewed on your PC. By hitting this button down here, this is your export test data. You'll get a file export success if it successfully downloads. If for some reason the test file is corrupted or there's an issue, you'll see an export failure. And once you're done, you can simply pull it out and then take it off to your PC. The final one, the final button on here, just do test 10 here. Say you no longer need this for immediate review. You can simply hit your trash button, hit yes, and it dumps it into the recycle bin. It's not out of the system yet. You can still go back into your recycled tests and pull it back up if you need to look at it again. Okay, so for the final button, we've got current tests. So this is going to show you the display for when your test is actually running. In order to start a test, you're simply going to hit this button right here, and it will start recording automatically. Now, you've got some options as far as your test mode on the right-hand side here. You've either got step or you've got continuous. If you look on the left-hand side here, you can see we have step and we have continual. So depending on what you have set here and what you have set here is going to determine how your test is going to run. How is that sample going to move? We currently have it set at step, and in here we have the step set at 1 millimeter. So let's say we want to change it to 2.0. Notice it changes here. So now, the way we have this set up, when this test starts running, whenever you hit the advance button on the main screen for motor control, it's going to advance that specimen up 2 millimeter for erosion. Something to keep in mind when you're doing this, this is very dependent on human interaction. So you're actually going to have to pay attention to when that sample erodes down to the lower level on the flume in order to know when to advance it again the next 2 millimeter. If you have it set for continual, now here we've got it at 0.35 millimeters per second. It's going to run without human intervention at a continual speed of 0.35 millimeters per second throughout the test until you stop it. When you hit the home button, what this is going to do is it's going to retract the sample out of the flume, and the motor is going to go down to its lowest level so that it facilitates removing the expended Shelby tube and sample for a second or another test after this.